Notre Dame coach Brian Kelly said, this past week, if necessary, he'd go on Oprah to beg for a BCS title game berth. May not be necessary. Welcome to SportsCenter with Hannah Storm. I'm Bob Lee, a new #1 today.
It's almost surreal for fans of the Fighting Irish. It's actually been 19 years since Notre Dame was ranked #1 in a poll. Robert Smith is by to analyze an insane day in college football. Also, we're live in Pittsburgh and Foxborough. Week 11 of the NFL. It's all ahead on SportsCenter.
Ready.
And that's just a little snippet of what we saw from Les Miles. Hannah Storm, Bob Lee, and Robert Smith starting your morning off with a bang here, right where we left off last night. BCS chaos. Last unbeaten left standing is the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. So let's get right to it. We're going to start with the last game first and show you.
We'll talk about the Irish in just a second. I know you got your seatbelt on.
I'm actually,
you're not excited about this at all.
However, let's talk. The Southeast Conference has just emerged once again. Let's talk about the fact they're right there in the mix.
Well, I think that's very interesting after the loss of Texas A&M with Alabama. Everybody's saying, oh, well, Alabama's got a chance now.
Hello, Georgia.
Wait a second. Yeah, we've got a Georgia team sitting out there.
SEC fight, though, right now for #2 because #1
is Notre Dame. Thank you, Bob. I'm just going to freeze that moment in my memory. But let's see how long that lasts, because Notre Dame fans, well aware of their history with USC. It's a series in which anything can happen. Do want to point out that Matt Barkley was hurt late in that wild game against USC. He was wasn't seen with his arm in a sling, but it was under a jacket. We don't know the seriousness of that. But if Barkley's out,
you think about all the times that they were bailed out by their defense.
All the mistakes that he made.
Oh, and Tommy Reese, Everett Golson going back and forth. If it's not
Sheridan, by the way, the odds maker says right now, if the Irish played Bama.
This game isn't even on the board yet.
It's not even on the board.
It's not even scheduled yet.
And he says Notre Dame would be a 10-point underdog. All right, so there we have a lot of football to play before we get to that point, right? And boy,
lines are meant to do one thing. It's to balance out betting.
Divide the money.
It's got nothing to do with who's going to win or lose.
Exactly.
That's right. We're going to come back. We're going to talk Heisman. We're going to look at Brad Edwards' projected BCS standings. Much more coming up, including this gem. Merrill Hodge here, breaking it down after a long week in the film room. The Jets at 3-6 again on center stage with their usual self-inflicted drama. They face another 3-win team in the Rams today. Desperation lingers in the air because they have the Patriots coming up on Thanksgiving. So we look at this team because they'll meet Brian Schottenheimer, their former offensive coordinator, the guy they jettisoned in favor of Tony Sparano. Are the Jets better off after making that move?
No. I mean, listen, you would need Chuck. Is he playing fast, making poor decisions? Absolutely. And guess what? I didn't even talk about how
offensively that they, whether it be a second receiver, someone to replace LT, the offensive line. There were a myriad of problems that just weren't addressed from a personnel standpoint.
None of it. They drafted, well, they went and traded for Tim Tebow, though.
True.
How good
and that is,
but they addressed no other
been impactful in other ways, which we'll get into later in the show. Meanwhile, the Cowboys, they face the Browns today. They have the Redskins on Thanksgiving. They do have some opportunity here to perhaps, before the end of the week, go 6-5 and at least for a few days, get right there ahead of the idle Giants in the division. How far can Tony Romo take this team? His team's a bit of a...
made mistakes. Wide receivers have made mistakes, and it's compounded. So the formula is, with authority, and Tony Romo complements that. That defense really has been...
Say that about, right? They established that running game. It helps the quarterback. Look at the Saints. Yeah. But with authority.
Well, I'm glad you brought the Saints up because you are dead on.
You are the authority on that. Merrill Hodge with us all morning long. See you on Countdown.
All right, Hannah.
Watch this, and that is why we invented the internet.
It is incredible.
That is the best soundbite in 34
Ever.
years here.
Yes, it is.
It's
epic. And it just got better. He just worked himself up into a frenzy. Well done. Thank you, Les Miles. Thank you for just about every Sunday morning you've given us. Right, you see Manti Te'o, another fine performance in a blowout win over Wake Forest for the undefeated Irish, and Johnny
No
Football.
reason you mentioned Notre Dame there.
Legitimate. I believe he's in your top 2 in the Heisman watch. Johnny Football, then a spectacular day, just continues his late Heisman push, 5 touchdowns. So who do you like right now?
I do like Johnny Football. In a row. They go on the road. They played Auburn. They played Mississippi State. The most outstanding player in college football. But I do agree with you. You heard me earlier talking about Pantyhose.
Where is he?
He's number. I've had that chance. This team would not be undefeated if it weren't for that defense. And you talk about Pantyhose. I mean, he's the keystone. He's the keystone of the arch of that front seven. And he has had a fantastic year. Certainly deserves consideration. You'll see him in New York.
Yeah, one of the great, really sports personalities there at the University of Notre Dame. He's had a big impact. Robert Smith with us, thankfully, all morning long. Welcome back to SportsCenter. It all comes down now to the last race of the chase at Homestead. Five-time Sprint Cup champ Jimmie Johnson still has a chance, although trailing leader Brad Keselowski by 20 points. And while Johnson wants to go down in history as the all-time greatest, Keselowski is looking to make some history of his own, becoming the first to win a title while driving the famed Blue Deuce, and the first to win it at the Sprint Cup level for IndyCar legend Roger Penske. Shannon Spake joins us now. And Shannon, Keselowski now sits on the front row thanks to his future teammate Joey Logano crashing in qualifying. You've covered Keselowski's career for years, spent a lot of time with him lately. What's your sense of how he's handling the enormity of the happenings today? And out of trouble, Shannon. Coverage of the chase finale begins at 1:30 Eastern. Next hour, my conversation with both drivers. And Shannon Spake, as always, thanks. Mike D'Antoni said even he was shocked at the strange events that seemingly unfolded around him last weekend. The new Lakers coach, who hopes to lead the team tonight against the Rockets, will do so in front of a crowd that was chanting for Phil Jackson to return to the bench before management put the kibosh on the 11-time champ. D'Antoni now inherits a skeptical Laker nation, also a ton of all-star talent, and one of the sport's most glamorous jobs, and all of it in the blink of an eye. As the former Suns and Knicks coach tells our... All right, enough of that Jersey love over there, okay? The chaos continues. Kansas State and Oregon pave the way for Notre Dame's first #1 ranking in 19 years. Coming up.
All right. This past week, Brian Kelly said, you know, if necessary, I'll go on Oprah and beg for a BCS title game berth. That may not be necessary. As we continue on SportsCenter with Hannah Storm, I'm Bob Lee, a new #1 right now.
Yep, and it's really hard for Irish fans to believe after all this time. It has been 19 years since Notre Dame was ranked #1 in a poll. Robert Smith here to analyze a crazy day in college football. We're also live in Pittsburgh and Foxborough. Week 11 of the NFL season coming up on SportsCenter.
What Florida did with that great Tebow speech years ago, but
Right.
They put it on a plaque and it's sitting there.
Right.
They should do the same thing. Maybe put an iPad there so you could watch it at the same time, but a plaque with that speech from Les.
It's so beautiful. Is that delirium? That's the definition thereof,
That's
right?
the
That's
best soundbite I've ever seen here in 30+ years.
Was that only one soundbite?
Yeah, I was strung together with a couple of bleeps in there. All right.
Johnson, 244 yards on 11 catches, both career highs, albeit against an injured Tremont Williams. Plenty of added motivation for Williams and the Packers defense today, a defense that will also be without linebacker Clay Matthews, who's out for a couple of weeks with that hamstring injury. Bob Holtzman has more on today's matchup and the Packers after an uneven start offensively. Bob, how are they feeling about their team? They kick off the NFL action with a meeting with the Houston Texans. That's Bob Holtzman reporting all day long. Thanks. Championship Sunday, it all comes down to the last race of the chase at Homestead. Five-time Sprint Cup champ Jimmie Johnson has a shot at a 6th, although trailing leader Brad Keselowski by 20 points. And while Johnson wants to go down in history as the all-time greatest, Keselowski is looking to become the first to win a title while driving the famed Blue Deuce, and the first to win it at the Sprint Cup level for IndyCar legend Roger Penske. Outspoken and confident before ever winning a title, as I found out when I sat down with both drivers face to face. Very interesting, and thanks to a guy who will be his teammate at Penske Racing next season, Joey Logano, who crashed in qualifying as a pole sitter. Keselowski now moves to the front row today in his quest to win the title in just his 3rd full-time season. Johnson, by the way, qualifying 10th. Anything can happen. Our coverage begins today at 1:30 Eastern. Thanks a lot. We have Adam Schefter standing by before he runs over to your studio there. The Jets have lost 3 straight. Let's face it, they're desperate going into their game today. They're in last place in the division. They're the Patriots coming up on Thanksgiving. And more of that self-inflicted locker room drama. Where are we in that regard?
As Newsday reported them, and I think when you speak to people around the league, they believe that each of the quarterbacks has an issue.
It's so interesting because Tebow ostensibly was brought in to really push Sanchez in practice to really have that threat over his shoulder that they thought.
And it hasn't
might
worked
help
that way.
Focus. The Patriots, they're shuffling their roster all around. They're sort of doing their usual. Deion Branch is out. Aqib Talib is in. He's been activated. Their rent-a-veteran program, I think that's what Sal Palantonio called it, continues to roll along. Is this a good move for the Pats?
Here's where they can't lose by it. Then they gave up, plus having a
of opportunity, the way it's stacking up for some teams, their season could be over. Really could propel them into contention like the Cowboys.
Once we get to Thanksgiving,
Adam Schefter, he will be with you all day long coming up on Countdown. Thanks.
The early action around the National Football League.
Meanwhile, Jade and David are over on ESPN2. Well, we have OTL as well. We have Sports Center, all sorts of stuff. If you want to hear more about the new #1 in college football, check out
right.
Sports Center. Otherwise, Countdown.
Right here, right now.